All right, here we go. Welcome back to the Assassination Audit video number 74. We're going to continue going down the line with this video on Wesley Frazier. And it is now 12 April, and we'll just get right back into it.
Stayed.
No, I never went in. We never visited. I never went in. We visited or sat down and have a soda or a cup of coffee. I never did that, or we never went together anywhere after work. Sometimes I would let him out in front of his house because maybe I had some errands to run. Maybe I was supposed to go by the store and pick up milk or bread or whatever my sister had asked me to bring that afternoon.
How did the riding back and forth come about?
The way that came about was that after learning that that his wife lived with Marina out in Irving, and I asked him, I said, well, how do you get back and forth? And he said, well, I usually go out and see my wife on the weekend. And I said, well, how do you get out there? He says, bus, ride the bus, or taxi, however I can get out there. And I told him, I said, well, I go back and forth every day. Anytime you want to go over and see your wife, I said, all you have to do is tell me during the day, and I said, you can ride out to Irving with me, and then if you spend the night, then you can ride back with me.
So this is interesting. He tells this story about how Oswald ended up riding with him in like 3 or 4 different ways over many, many years. This is like the early 90s. We read through his transcript, and it said that he was told by his sister and also by his boss that this new guy was starting, and that Oswald, while he was showing Oswald the ropes and how to do things, asked him, he said, well, I understand you live out in Irving. Would it be okay if I ride with you on Fridays to go out to Irving to see my wife, because my wife is living out there? In this version, he's saying that he came forward and asked Oswald. So, I don't know, maybe people's memories change over years, but it can't be that much difference. It's either him initiating it or Oswald. But I don't see anything nefarious in why he would change it. I just think maybe he's remembering it differently or whatever's going on. I'm not sure.
The next morning. And actually what eventually occurred on that was that he would ride out to Irving with me on Friday afternoon. I would drop him off, and then I would not see him again until Monday morning. And I know sometimes people might ask, well, did you ever go anywhere together, or did you ever go to the movies or ball games, or did you ever do anything together? We never did.
Again, I find that pretty damn hard to believe. If you've got 2 guys working together, and they're spending, all this time working together, most likely they're going to be hanging out after work. They're going to go grab a beer. They're going to go fishing. Something like that. So I find this very, very hard to believe. But, it was only a month and a half. So maybe, maybe that hadn't developed yet.
Did he ever offer to buy your gas now and then?
No, because I never asked him. Because he lived like less than a half a block. His wife lived with Miss Payne less than a half a block from where I lived. And I was going there, so I just always said to myself, well, it takes that much gas for me to go to work. Why charge him? Now, some people would, but I'm not that type of person. If I'm going somewhere myself, why charge someone?
And he never volunteered, though, either, did he?
I think he may have. I asked a couple of times, and I told him it wasn't necessary. I think at first he did. Since you asked me the question, I think he did, and I told him, I said, well, that's not necessary.
Your regular routine started at 8 o'clock, and when would you guys normally break for lunch? Noon or so, or?
I think it was 12 to 12:30.
Okay. Where did you have your lunch normally?
I usually had my lunch there at the Texas School Book Depository because I usually carried my lunch. A few times I did go down to a little diner that you could just go in and order and sit down. It was a little, which was now part of the West End. It was between the School Book Depository and the State Building. There was a little diner there. You could get sandwiches and so forth. And a few times I walked down there by myself and ate lunch there. But most of the time,
On a personal note, when I don't know if this restaurant's there anymore. I don't remember the name, but back when I was there passing through in 2007, I went to the School Book Depository, Dealey Plaza, the Holocaust Museum, all that right there. And then if you go one street, east of Houston, I don't know the name of this street, and you go down that street, I know you go up to Elm, and then you go from Houston to Elm, and then you go east to the next block, and then you take a left, and then that's the West End District. Now, the West End District, they used to have a really good alternative assassinations museum. I don't know what happened to that. It was inside some kind of building that had a bunch of different stores in it. But when I went back there, and I remember it was there in 1992, 93 maybe 94. I think maybe 94. And then, but when I went in 2007, that whole building had closed up, and I don't think there was hardly any tenants in it. But right across the street, there was this really, really good Italian restaurant. And the thing that was great about it is they had these roofs. They had these seats on the roof. And you could go up there, and you had tables and everything. And I have no idea if this place is still there. But this is like 2007. But really great Italian food. I had like some shrimp pasta or prawns and pasta or linguine or something like that. It was just awesome. It was really hot that day, about 80 degrees, sitting on the roof there, getting kind of a view. You can't really see much because, you got all the buildings. You can't see Dealey Plaza because you got the buildings, the Dowtex building and the building behind that kind of in the way. But got a really good view up there. It was really nice. I don't know if it's still there or not, but that's just a personal view. He also says in another video that there used to be a kind of a food truck that would come around and sell sandwiches and sodas and stuff like that, and a lot of people would go out and get that. He said he never did that, and so I find that interesting. Also, he says in a later video about 2010, 2007, 15 or something like that, he says that, which he never says here and he never says in his Warren Committee testimony, he says that when he heard the shots, he stood there and some other people went down to the railroad yards. He kind of stepped down towards the railroad yards but didn't go all the way down Elm. Then he came back to the stairs, stood around, and people were going in and out of the building. Eventually he ends up on the corner of Houston and Elm, okay, and he said that he saw Oswald come around the back of the building, off the back dock, walk up Houston to Elm, cross Elm, and kept walking up Elm, headed east. And which makes sense because that's where Oswald eventually catches that bus up at Elm and Ackerd. He said he didn't say hello to Oswald. Oswald didn't see him, and he just figured that Oswald was going to lunch. That was his thinking, which is kind of strange because he says in other, I think even in this video, that Oswald said he brought his lunch. So, and then after that, but in his Warren Commission testimony, he says he went down to Elm, or went down near the railroad tracks a little bit, came back, stood on the stairs, then went inside, stood around near his boss's office and they talked with other people while the police and everyone was coming in. Then he went and got his lunch. He went downstairs and he ate his lunch. So maybe he forgot that part where he saw, Oswald come around the back end. I would think that would be very, very important. I do find it interesting that nowhere, out of all the witnesses inside the school book depository, nowhere does the Warren Commission lawyers ask any of them, did you see Oswald after the shooting of the president? Not one. And they didn't ask him, and he didn't volunteer the information for some reason. I would think that would be very important to volunteer that kind of information, since it goes into great detail in his Warren Commission testimony. I would have ended that way. Hey, at the very end, I saw Oswald come around the back dock, get on to Houston, walk up to Elm and cross right in front of me and head east on Elm. I would have mentioned that whether they asked it to me or not, but that's just me. Anyway, we'll keep going.
I brought my lunch, and I would, some of the guys would eat their lunch out on the dock. Some would eat their lunch in the break room, playing dominoes or cards. There was usually something going on all the time, because some of the guys like to play dominoes and different card games.
The break room was also known as the domino room.
Another interesting thing is that Oswald even told the police that he came downstairs, went to the second floor lunchroom, got a Coke, was confronted by the policeman, then went downstairs to the domino room, got his lunch, and went out back on the back dock and ate his lunch with Shelley. Okay? Although there's no testimony of anyone seeing Oswald, whether it's Shelley or Virginia Davis or any of the other employees, seeing Oswald on the back dock eating his lunch. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Room, and that was on the first floor?
Yes.
What part of the building? North, south, east, west?
Okay. The break room was located over in the corner of the it was the first floor. Like if you walk up from outside, walk on the dock and walk into the first floor, it was in the corner, and it was to the left of Mr. Shelley's office. It was between Mr. Shelley's office and the men's restroom.
So what he's talking about is the Domino's room. So there were two break rooms, okay? Back then we still had segregation. There's still kind of mild segregation going on inside the school book depository. Most of the people that wore suits, who weren't the regular workers, especially if they were black, did not eat. They didn't eat on the domino room. Domino room was like for Oswald, the other black employees, and other worker employees. Upstairs in the second floor lunchroom, where they had the coffee machine and the Coke machine, that's where the management and other people ate. Oswald and other people would go up there and get a Coke, and then they would come back down. Anyway, so what he's talking about right here is the domino room.
Okay, so that would put it right by the northeast corner of the building.
Yes.
Okay, I understand. And that's where most of you and your co-workers would eat your lunch. Would you guys go up to the second floor lunchroom at all?
I did go up and eat my lunch up there a couple of times, but the lunchroom was small, and we didn't have a lot of tables and chairs, and a lot of times the women that worked in the different publisher's office was in there, and I didn't feel it was right to take a seat from someone that wanted to get away from their desk. We had a lot of places to sit down to eat downstairs. Sometimes I used to eat up there on the first floor. Sometimes I eat down in the basement, because that's where I kept my lunch. it was nice and cool down there, and sometimes it was quiet. If I just wanted to have some quiet time, just eat my lunch and not talk anyway while I'm eating my lunch, and just for a few minutes, just have, as I said, not to be repetitious, just quiet time to yourself. And sometimes I'd take a book and I'd be looking at a book while I was eating, something I wanted to reading there. I often look through the books. We had a lot of publishers for anything from kindergarten through college.
Unfortunately, there are very few photographs of the interior of the book depository building, and of those, hardly any are color. Do you remember anything about the colors in the lunchroom?
No, I don't. Like I said, I only was up there a couple of times. I knew they had like a Coke machine, and I think they had a snack machine in there, and I'm not real. I can't think of much anything else in there that I can recall at this time. But it just had a few chairs in there and tables, but it was very very small.
I'm going to ask you a question that's really obscure, but if you don't know, that's fine. The soft drink machine was actually a Dr. Pepper machine. Now, my question is, did they just have Dr. Pepper, or did it also have Cokes or Pepsi or other flavors in there?
To the best of my memory, there was a variety of drinks in there.
Okay. It's an obscure question, but it comes up now and then, so I thought I'd ask. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question, but I do remember those machines. They would have one like banner or label on the top, and all the machines were the same basically, and you could have either Dr. Pepper or Pepsi or Coke, and then it would have like these little slots on the side with a little door, and you'd put your money in, and then you'd open the door, which would kept the cool in, and then you would pull your bottle out. It would allow you to pull one bottle out. And they would have, Fanta, Grape Knee High, Dr. Pepper, and Coke, and then if it was a Pepsi machine, they'd have Pepsi, and then whatever their, Mountain Dew, whatever their sub-products were and stuff like that. But yeah, I remember those machines. Actually, I used to go to one of those machines after school. I would get out of primary school about 3 o'clock, 2:30. I'd walk over to the elementary school. My sister would get out at 3 o'clock, and I'd sit across the street at this little convenience store that's actually still there now. The school's gone. And if I had some change that I had found that day, or the day before or whatever, I would use that and get the sodas out. They had two different types of machines. They had one that laid down, and it was a red Coke machine, and then you would open it up and then pull the bottle up. And then they had another one that stood up, and you would open it up and pull the soda bottle out there. So that seems to be the kind of one. I've seen pictures of the second floor lunchroom, and that seems to be the kind of one they had in there. But yeah, definitely the Coke there. The thing they try to say is that, especially in this, Prayer Man video I've seen, is that Oswald wasn't in the second floor lunchroom and that this was all made up and all this bullshit. The thing I usually go with is the preponderance of evidence and preponderance of witness statements. So if you've got 5 or 6 people saying, yeah, I saw so-and-so with the gun, da-da-da-da-da, but it doesn't fit your theory, then you have to throw your theory out, okay? So I go with the majority of witness statements in the very, very beginning. Later on, 20 years later, after people have read things, I don't count them as much. But their first initial police statement or statement to the FBI, and then it goes down from there to the Warren Commission, and then 20 minutes later, 30 years later in a video and stuff like that, I take that a lot less serious. But when you read the testimony of one of the employees there, and she says at like 15 after 12, she passed through the lunchroom and Oswald was sitting there drinking a Coke. You got to think that Oswald was in there drinking a Coke and not standing out front by Shelley, and by Frazier, who never saw him there. So you can throw out Frazier man. Prayer man. I don't care how many deductions you make from where people said they were on a chart or whatever. If nobody says that no, Oswald couldn't be the shooter because I saw him standing behind or standing by Frazier, then you got to deduct that Oswald wasn't there. They can't all be lying. They can't all be in on the conspiracy. Okay, that's the deal. People remember different things different ways, but you can get a preponderance of consensus of all the different memories of things that happen. And believe me, it is a mess. When you read these statements like Virginia Davis and all these other people, it's a mess. People don't remember things. They're highly unreliable, but if you can get the things that they do agree on, the majority of them, then you kind of get an idea of what happened and what was going on. And again, that goes both ways. It discounts theories like Prayer Man, but it also discounts the Warren Commission, because if you look at their testimony, the Warren Commission, just like the other conspiracy theorists that, I don't buy, they pick and choose. They cherry pick the testimony that they want. So like I said, you've got this pyramid here, okay? There's a pyramid of witnesses and statements, okay? At the bottom, you have people that saw and heard things, okay? We'll say, for convenience sake, 100 people. Out of that 100 people, maybe 90 are either going to go to the police department or the sheriff department and give a statement. The other ones are just going to figure, I didn't really see that much, or I'm scared to say something, or whatever the reasons. So you're not going to have everybody that saw things, come out right then and catch the police and get a statement. And then from these police statements and sheriff statements and affidavits, you're going to have the FBI, which is doing their job, is going to come along and read those statements and go back and interview the people they are most interested in getting more information. So out of those 90 that give police statements, you're going to have maybe 65, 70 that the FBI is going to interview. And then out of those people, you're going to have a certain amount of people that are going to want to be interviewed by the attorneys for the Warren Commission. And so if you've got 60 people they interviewed by the FBI, you're probably going to have 50 people, maybe 40 people, interviewed by the attorneys for the Warren Commission. And then out of those 40 people, you're going to have maybe 20, 30 people that are going to be invited to Washington to testify before the Warren Commission, or the Warren Commission is going to come to D.C. or Dallas and interview them. And so out of 100 people, and then out of those statements, those 20, maybe 15 of them, the Warren Commission, maybe 10 of them, the Warren Commission is going to take serious and use for their theory to back up their version of what they say it happens. Okay, so that's how the system works. It's a filtration process. And especially when you're cherry picking, you ignore all the other things that don't go along with your theory, and and then you just cherry pick individual things. I mean, to be honest, I like Garrison. I think he was right on track, but I also think, just from human nature, that he was cherry picking also. He was cherry picking things in a certain direction and ignoring other things. I think most of the things that he got was correct. He was on the right track. I don't think it was the entire CIA and FBI like he was trying to say, and the president. I think it was rogue elements of that. But see, then again, I'm cherry picking, you see. So everyone's biased. You can't just say, I'm the only unbiased one. I'm the only one that's taking in all the information. I have my pet peeves and things like that. I try to go with a consensus, and I'm sure as I go along that people are going to correct me. They're going to present evidence that I either didn't know about or, was totally oblivious to, and things like that. So that's the way evidence works. But the people who go back to my point about the Coke, the people that go back and say that the whole, Dallas patrolman who, we see in the video, he runs across Elm Street up the stairs into the school book depository, and we would assume that he kept at that pace, or maybe slowed down a little bit, and eventually ends up in the back left-hand corner going up the stairs, sees Oswald, that he retimed that, redid it for the commission. It was up about 90 seconds. I'd say that's probably about right. And that's where he saw Oswald, because that's where Oswald was told to be, to wait in the lunchroom for a phone call. Okay, that's why he was totally oblivious to what had happened outside. They wanted to keep him away from the street scene, okay, put him in an area that no one else would be, most likely. Okay? That's why Oswald was in the lunchroom. So he wouldn't have an excuse, because there wouldn't be any witnesses, okay? Because everyone else has gone out front. They're putting him at the back of the back of the building on the second floor, told him to wait there by the phone for a phone call. He gets bored, he's getting a Coke. Why doesn't he eat his lunch there? Because his lunch is downstairs, and he's told to wait on the second floor for a phone call. Further instructions. It's only when the patrolman shows up with the gun pointing at him, and his boss, Mr. Truly, vouches for him, that he realizes that something has gone terribly wrong. That's when he panics. You can tell that he panics because he leaves without getting his jacket. He goes out the back. This is the scenario I think that happened. Is he goes downstairs from the lunchroom, goes out the back dock, goes on to Houston and Elm, and starts to go back up to where Ruby's club was to find out what happened. When he finds out Ruby's not there or the club is closed, he goes up to Eckerd, gets on the bus, and tries to get the bus to go home, but the traffic backs up so much that he's still panicking that something's gone terribly wrong, and so he gets off that, walks over to the Greyhound bus station, gets in the cab and goes home, and then has the cabbie. This is how you can tell he's panicking. He left the jacket, he's taking the cab home, and he has the cabbie drop him off 3 or 4 blocks from his house, and then walks back up. Then he immediately goes in, gets another jacket, and gets his gun. And of course, the obvious thing that tells you that Oswald's not involved in the assassination, he wasn't the shooter, but he knew about something about the plot. He knew enough and had enough fear to go in and get his gun. He didn't get his gun because he's the assassin and he's trying to get away. Okay? If you think about it, if you're the assassin and you're trying to get away, why would you go to the second floor lunchroom and sit there and drink a Coke? Why would you have a Coke in your hand when you're trying to escape from the 6th floor, or the 5th floor, 6th floor assassination perch? You wouldn't have a Coke in your hand, you'd have a gun in your hand, ready to shoot your way out. But he doesn't. That tells you right there, Oswald's not involved in the assassination, but is some way in the periphery of it. Either he's trying to penetrate the assassination, or he knows about it. Something is there that all the evidence points to. Okay? Anyway, so we'll go back to this, and but the Coke is very important. One of the witnesses, like I said, saw him in the lunchroom 15 minutes for the assassination, sitting in there drinking a Coke. Why wouldn't he be downstairs eating his lunch? Because he's waiting for a phone call. Ruby's going to call him and say, hey, we were able to get my information to the police, the FBI, and stop the assassination. Anyway, we'll keep going.
I understand that there was a caterer who would come by in the mornings with lunch. Do you remember?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just fixing to tell you I'd forgotten something.
Go.
Yes, there was a catering truck that used to come by on the morning break time, and some of the people that worked in the building, not only people in the warehouse, but sometimes people from upstairs would come down and they would buy their lunch off of the catering truck, plus whatever they wanted, if they wanted something for the break time.
Okay. Do you remember the name of the catering service, or who was the guy? And was it a white guy, a black guy, a woman?
I think over the period of time I worked there, I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think there were several different people that worked for that one catering service, and if my memory serves me correct, I think it was Industrial Catering Service. Now you can check that out, but I think, and I think they may still be in business today.
Okay.
But I'm not real sure of the name, but it's something, seemed like it was industrial.
That's pretty good, going back almost 39 years for some.
Also, I wanted to say something. The guy who's interviewing him is Gary Mack. Okay, now Gary Mack was definitely on the conspiratorial side, that there was some kind of conspiracy involved in the assassination. He's the one that came out with the blow-up of the photo of the grassy knoll, the picket fence, and it had Badge Man and the guy in the construction hat. He's the one that came out with that. Now, to me, a lot of that is sort of like that, that psychological ink blot test. They filled in what they want to see. I believe there was probably someone up there, but whether you can see them in that photo, who knows? It's just like, when you're a kid, we used to lay down on a sunny day and lay on a hillside and look up at the clouds, and we'd see rabbits and sheep and all kinds of stuff. Just whatever your mind can make of those, because that's the way the mind works. It wants to see things, see figures, things like that. I remember one time I was camping and kept hearing this noise out in the woods, a howling, hooting noise, whatever, and through the moonlight I could see what I thought was a face. Okay? And it looked just like someone, a big someone, was standing there looking at me through the woods. And then I decided, fuck it, I got a stick and a rock, and I went charging towards what I thought was the face. And when I broke through the bushes and through the hole, it was nothing but a rock. But from the distance and in the moonlight, it looked like a face. So what I'm saying is that, people make things the way they want it to be or what they imagine it to be. Not that it's always reality. So the ink block test, the Polaroid, it could be Badge Man, it might not be. I think it's most likely not Badge Man. Okay? Not that I don't believe there wasn't a shooter up there, because I do believe that. But also, one thing I wanted to say with Gary Mack is that Gary Mack got a job at the 6th Floor Museum, and he changed his tune. He no longer believed that there was a conspiracy and believed the Warren Commission was right on. And that happened shortly after he'd gotten a divorce. I think he went bankrupt, lost his house, things like that, and he was able to get this job. So it tells you that money talks, and that people can change their tune, just depending on who's influencing them. So that's pretty interesting, I think. But we're going to stop here, and we're going to continue next time with this. Let me see, 20. Write down my minutes here. 25 minutes, so I know where to start up next time. Okay, and next we're going to go on to our next section, and we'll keep driving on. All right, so we're going to pick up with the Willem Altman's interview of George de Mohrenschildt and his wife.
And spoke Russian, well-educated Russian, not a vulgar type of Russian that one hears from a ditch digger.
George, I might inject here that you are actually at the moment teaching Russian at Texas University in Arlington.
Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lecturer.
Yeah. One moment, Jan, you wanted to interject? All right, I thought maybe. You mentioned somewhere along the line that he did read the classics, and did he talk intelligently about Russian classic writers?
Yes. He did not talk at great length about it, but he definitely appreciated the atmosphere created by the Russian classics, the atmosphere of the Russian countryside, of the life of the Russian people, and of the complicated Russian mental processes.
And again, you got to ask yourself, if Oswald is just this poor, crazy, uneducated person, how is he able to read Russian classics? I mean, I read Toy Story. Was it Toy Story? War and Peace. 600 pages, and that was in English. And it literally took me probably half of my junior year to read that damn book, and it was still way over my head. I was 17, but still. I'll use it as a comparison. I read all the Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit within like a month, but it took me 6 months to read Tolstoy's War and Peace. And even though it was translated from Russian into English, it was still very, very higher level of writing and speaking and stuff like that. But here's Oswald reading all the Russian classics, and think what you may about the Russians, they're not stupid. They're very, very intellectual, very, very smart. I mean, when you think about the American mafia, you don't think about people that are college educated, PhDs and stuff like that. But with the Russian mafia, you've got people with doctorates and PhDs and things like that. So the Russians are very, very educated people. They've got an intelligentsia just like we do. But here's this guy, this poor, what do you want to call it, book gatherer, reading Russian classics in Russian. Why? Is he going to run into Russian so he can discuss it with George de Mohrenschildt? That's why he's reading it? No. When you're in an assignment and you're building a legend, you try to learn as much about your character as possible. Okay? So we'll think again, like I talk about movies and scripts and actors and things like that. I remember the story about, what was that guy from Batman? Hold on one second. Alright, so there was this movie called The Fighter, okay, and it was about this really incredible boxer that lived in Boston, I believe, by the name of, was it Dickie, what was his name? Mickey Ward? No. It was Dickie Eklund, I believe. And let me just see here. Hold on one second. Yeah. So Dickie Eklund was a really good fighter, and he had a brother, Mickey Ward, or stepbrother, or half brother, whatever, that was wanting getting into fighting, and Dickie had done really well in his fighting career, but he had a problem. He liked to smoke crack and meth and all kinds of other drugs like that, and that totally messed him up as a fighter. But once he saw that his little brother wanted to get into fighting, he tried to clean up his act and help him out. Okay, and that was the kind of the storyline there. So these story was put on film. It was played, Dickie, the drug guy, was played by Christian Bale. Mickey Ward was played by Mark Wahlberg. So my whole point of this is that what Christian Bale is a type of actor that he doesn't just read lines out loud, okay? He totally immerses himself in that character. He becomes that character, okay? I think it's a method acting, I think that's what it's called. But he takes it to the extreme. What he did is he had Dickie and his brother come. I think Mickey lived with Wahlberg, and Christian Bale and Eklund lived together, and he would copy, try to sound like him, try to move like him, try to talk like him. So he had him around him for months on end, and Christian Bale became Dickie Eklund, okay? And Christian Bale does this with every character. There's even a story I remember about, I think it was in one of the Batman movies, there's even some audio where Christian Bale, before he, gets in front of the camera, he prepares himself mentally, and he goes into that character. He channels that character through his body and his mind, and becomes that person, and he no longer is Christian Bale the actor. That's the way he does it. And there was audio of him once, a few minutes before he's about to go on the camera, and he's trying to be prepared, but someone interrupted him or made him lose his train of thought, and he's just railing and screaming and yelling that, they paid me millions of dollars to get into these characters and to perform, and this is how I do it, and you're fucking talking on set. And he's just railing at these guys for not being professional. So whenever he would perform, the whole set would have to be quiet. There couldn't be any distractions, nothing. And so they actually reduced the crew probably about in half, because Christian Bale was so intense in his character, okay? And especially when he played people that really existed, not just some character that was made up by a writer in Hollywood. So it was a thing called method acting. He becomes that person. He channels that person through them. And he copied Dickie Eklund, acted like Dickie Eklund. You thought Christian Bale had started doing drugs the way he acted in this movie, and he lost a lot of weight to represent, what happens to these drug addicts. They lose a lot of weight because of their drug use and things like that. And he puts through incredible performances. It's amazing. Okay? Now, we'll go back to Oswald. Oswald, whether he knows it or not, is just an actor. Okay? He's performing. Yeah, I'm the crazy Marxist-Leninist who's living in, conservative Dallas in America. And he's channeling this character that he's been told to play. Maybe some of it he make believe. He's got a compassion for other people and against the segregation and things like that. But other things where he's a hardcore communist or whatever, you can even tell with his conversations with de Mohrenschildt that he doesn't buy it. Okay? He said it was dreadful having to listen to these after work they would have these mandatory communist rally meetings that they would have people up there that were opportunists that would, spout propaganda to the workers, and the workers just dreaded it. And now, if you're a die-hard fanatic into communism, why would you say something like that? Because you really don't believe it. You're acting. You're carrying on a role. So this is what Oswald is doing. But he's also absorbing the character by reading up on what they read, by keeping material, communist material, inside the house so he can keep up on the latest things. If you're going to study your enemy, you have to almost become your enemy. Think like your enemy in order to catch them, in order to beat them. Okay? You're not going to beat your enemy by being yourself. Okay? So, again, I'll go back in history. That's one thing the Romans did. The Romans, they would get beat really bad. The Celts, the Carthaginians, the Macedonians, someone would come along and just smash them up and destroy them. And so what makes the Romans unique is what they did, unlike other groups that we don't hear about anymore. The Romans would learn from their mistakes. They would go back to the battlefield and look at the casualties and look at the weapons of the soldiers of the enemy and look at their tactics and how, okay, they routed us here and they used this type of machine, or they used this type of tactic, or this type of armor, or this type of weapon. A good example is the Romans didn't have a navy. They didn't know anything about fighting at sea. And they got their asses kicked by the Carthaginians, who basically, imposed their will against their grain trade that they needed. But the Romans learned to fight on the sea by copying their enemies' tactics. What was winning against the Romans, they adopted their practices. Okay? They weren't proud and said, hey, these are barbarians, we're not going to learn anything from them. The Romans, whenever they got beat, they turned and looked at the enemy and how they beat them. And that's just the way you grow and the way you learn. And so the Romans, they developed this way as they couldn't really fight very well at sea, but they knew that the Carthaginians weren't good at fighting at land. So what they decided to do was to turn the naval ships into land army fighting platforms. And they invented this technique where they would sail close to the Carthaginian ship, up along beside it, and they had this gangway plank or whatever would swing out, being held by a rope, and then on the bottom end, they had a huge nail, like a grappling hook, and they would drop that onto the deck of the Carthaginians, and then they would run their soldiers onto the deck of the Carthaginian ships, and they didn't have any Marines or soldiers. They only had sailors who were at the oars, and they would wipe them out every time. And that's how the Romans learned. They learned, all the Roman techniques and weapons, they all adopted from their enemies. So this is what you do as an intelligence person, is if you want to defeat someone, you study their background, you become like them, and you start thinking like them, and then you can defeat them. This is what Oswald is doing. His assignment is to break these communists, okay, seek them out and act like a communist, and then he can expose any communists inside the white Russian community. I mean, think about it. You're a Marxist, Leninist, liberal, communist living in Dallas. What purpose would you have there? You're not going to recruit anybody. Okay, you're not going to establish any kind of Marxist, coffee, tea shop, library, colony there. Why would you even be there? Why not go someplace like California, San Francisco, New York, Greenwich Village? But he's in the heart of the darkness of the conservative movement. And it only tells you one thing, and he's moving around all these conservative groups with ease, okay, and no one's exposing him. And the reason is because he's on a mission, he's on an assignment, and he's being protected. All right.
Did you ask, for instance, talk about language, did you ask Marina how she got along buying stuff in shops without making any effort to learn English?
Well, that was quite amusing. She went to the store and knew only two English words, yes and no. And so she said she would point out to a merchandise that he wanted to get and said yes, and she didn't want it, she would say no. And that's how she got along in the stores.
George, how, getting back a minute to this...
Again, I'm not even sure if I buy that story. You know, it could be that Marina was pretty well trained in how to understand English. Okay? Because here she is, supposedly only be able to say yes and no in 1963, but in 1964 she's before the Warren Commission answering questions, listening to questions in English and answering them in English with no translation. Now how is that possible in 1 year?
Political philosophy of Lee Harvey Oswald. Did he ever ask you what your political philosophy was?
Well, my political philosophy is to live and let live.
That's what you told Oswald.
Yeah. And I'm not interested in any political organizations. And
you did vote Republican
I
always,
voted
usually.
Republican all my life because on my own personal reasons. But I would consider that each country deserves the government they have. And let the communists live the way they want, let the socialists live the way they want, let the dictatorships live the way we want. We have enough problems in this country to solve rather than to try to intervene in other countries' affairs. And that was more
George?
Well, I would totally disagree with that. Because I think when you have dictatorships like North Korea and China and Russia, that they deserve, and we have a responsibility to help those people out and free those people or be a part of that. So I don't agree with this liaison-faire type attitude he has. You know, like dictators be dictators. I mean, come on. Anyway. All right, something happened.
We lost a lot of
There we
friends, we
go.
lost a lot of business because of this absolutely useless way of investigation. Because you cannot find anything by asking questions, you have to investigate secretly, like Scotland Yard does, and not go in and asking people questions and assemble a bunch of papers. This is my criticism, by the way, of the Warren report too.
We will get to that in later chapters, George?
Yeah.
Because I want to keep that definitely all together, that package of your FBI experiences. So I would almost say we have gone now through a number of clarifications on the past chapters, on your relationships with, and I have made notes for further questions at a later stage. So why don't we continue, or do you have anything special you want
A few
to
things
inject?
I would like to mention. What Lee did not like about the United States. I
Oh,
remember.
yeah.
He did not like about the United States the existence of ultra-rightist hate groups, which he called fascist organizations. Number two, he disliked
And again, you have to ask yourself, if he doesn't like them, why is he living amongst them? It doesn't make any sense.
in the United States that it was hard to get education, at least to him. You have to pay for it. You have to work to get an education. You have to get a job to get an education. Well, in that I didn't agree with him, but that was his point of view. And the third, that it's hard in the United States to find a job and to make a living. And in this I have to agree with him because I had similar experiences. And I also have to say that FBI certainly didn't help Lee to hold the jobs.
Yeah, let's get. He had a lot of problems here in this area with getting a job, and
He
you
had-
think that's in part of the FBI going to all his bosses each time?
Definitely. Each time he had a job, they would go to his bosses and tell him that here is the guy who went to Soviet Russia. And you know what the result was. He lost the job.
So this is very interesting. I don't understand how they can say this because, you know, he didn't lose any of his jobs because of the FBI. I mean, if you look at the facts, he worked at the welding company. He quit there because he got bored of the welding job. Okay? He worked at Jigger Childs. He got let go there of poor performance. Okay? He worked at the Riley company. He got let go there because of poor performance. He wasn't showing up for his job. Okay, so if the FBI is going to his employers and he's getting fired because of them, it's not because of them. Not defending the FBI, but this statement here is completely incorrect. Another thing you got to figure, though, is that if all these guys are these ultra-conservatives, which they are, in Dallas, and the Riley Company, coffee company, okay, they're all informed by the FBI that this guy is a former defector to the Soviet Union, a communist, but they're still allowing him to work for them. Why are they doing that? I mean, seriously, especially with Jager Child Stovall, they've got defense contracts, but they're allowing this communist, a former defector, a traitor, to still work there? Why is that? Because the reason I say he wasn't fired because of the FBI, because he worked there from October of 1962 to April of 1963. Don't you think the FBI would have gone by in October, November of 1962 and informed his boss or questioned his boss? You know, because, I mean, it works like this. You go and work, you know, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you get a paycheck, but from that paycheck, they've taken out taxes. And then that company, every month or every quarter, is paying that taxes to the IRS. And they're going to list their employer identification number, the taxes that they have withheld, and here's the taxes to Uncle Sam. And then they're going to list all those employees with their social security number. So it'd be really simple and easy for the FBI to find out where Oswald is working if he didn't tell them himself. So within a month or two, the FBI is going to know where Oswald's working. They're going to go talk to his boss and they're going to explain to him this guy's a communist and whatever. But he never gets fired because of that? Why is that? That's because either the FBI didn't go there or they did and they told him that he's working for us or that everything's okay and just, you know, don't worry about it. And of course, all these employers, they're not stupid. They're going to read newspaper. They're going to have people that read newspapers. They're going to know about Oswald as a former defector, a former traitor to his country. But he never gets fired because of that. No one ever attacks him. I mean, can you imagine nowadays of what happened? You know, say that some guy went out and he, like I was using that example of Snowden. Snowden gets bored of living in Russia and wants to come back to the United States, and he goes and applies for, you know, an IT job at some company, and they're going to say, well, first of all, Snowden would have end up in prison for a couple of years, and then he's going to send in his resume, and he's in that interview, and they're going to say, hey, you got some great experience. See here, you worked for the U.S. government, and you know, worked for with that contractor for the U.S. government in high tech, and you've got all this experience. But I see here, for about 10 years, you've got no work experience. What happened? Oh, well, I defected to the Soviet Union and gave them all my government secrets. And then I got bored and came back to the United States, and I went to prison for 5 whatever years. And now I'm out and I'm looking for a job. You know what happened to Snowden? Well, first of all, the interviewer would say, sorry, we can't hire a convicted felon. And then he would point him at the door and say, get the fuck out of my office, you goddamn traitor, before I kick your ass or throw your ass out the front door. And that's 2023, where we're a little bit more liberal. Can you imagine what would have happened back in 1962? So it doesn't make any sense. First of all, Oswald, if he was a real defector and a traitor and did all the things he said he did, would have gone to prison, would have been arrested and convicted for espionage or for treason, okay? And would have spent a couple of years in jail if they had let him come back to the United States in the first place. So there's a reason he wasn't, and there's a reason none of these employers ever brought that topic up with him. Anyway, so we're going to stop here and move on to the next section. So now I wanted to spend some time on another conspiracy that was proven by the government and involved an assassination of a president, and it's the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so in about 2 days, we're coming up on the assassination of the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. He was assassinated, everybody knows, by John Wilkes Booth in Ford Theater, who shot him in the back of the head, okay, and he died across the street in the Peterson house. Okay, so the thing that gets lost in history, and I never knew about this until I read about it later, because they never talked about this when I was in high school, was that there was a conspiracy to decapitate the Union government, okay, by diehard Confederate sympathizers after Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. Now, Lee had surrendered about, about a week before what was it, Sherman or Grant? It was a Grant, okay? And it took about another month or so for the rest of the Confederate armies to individually surrender. But once Lee surrendered, since his army was the main army, the Army of Northern Virginia, that basically ended the war. But there were die-hard rejectionists who didn't want to end the war with the Confederacy, who wanted to continue the war, continue slavery from the South, and they thought the way to do it was to decapitate the Union government, not just kill Abraham Lincoln, but they tried to kill the vice president, the Secretary of War, and there were many people involved. It was a conspiracy, which that's all the definition of the conspiracy is two or more people involved in a crime. When you got two guys going, you got one guy robs a bank and the other guy's the driver, that's a conspiracy. So don't let, people dissuade you by saying, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist because you don't think it was just Oswald. Because conspiracy, and I'll put it to you another way, if the government, or at least the police, didn't think there was a conspiracy involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, after they arrested Oswald, they went over to the hospital where Frazier was at visiting his dad and arrested him also, brought him in and tried to force him to sign a fake confession that they had already typed up. Curry had already typed it up and threatened to beat Frazier unless he signed it. So they were already pushing the theory of conspiracy involving Oswald and Frazier. Basically, it was that Oswald got a ride with Frazier. Frazier knew he had a gun and ignored it and allowed him to do what he was going to do. Anyway, so this conspiracy involved several people, and they were all hanged. Okay? Booth ran off and was caught several days later and burnt to death, or shot and then burnt to death in a barn by Union soldiers. Other people involved in the conspiracy, they tried to stab Johnson. I think they tried to blow up Seward. There were many, many people involved. Even the landlady where the conspiracists were staying, she was hung for the conspiracy. Okay, 'cause I believe her son was involved in the conspiracy. So let's just blow off the whole notion that, lone nuts are the reason why presidents get killed. Because, you got McKinley, you got Garfield, all killed by anarchists, by crazy mentally ill people, and then supposedly, Kennedy's killed by this nut, Oswald, right? But that seems to forget the conspiracy just a few years before involving the Puerto Rican attempt on the assassination against Truman at the Blair House. Okay, they were gutting and renovating the White House, and so they moved the president over to nearby at the Blair House, and a conspiracy of several, I think 4 or 5 people, Puerto Ricans, came over and tried to assassinate Truman because they were for Puerto Rican independence from the United States. So that was a conspiracy, okay? But to say that Oswald was just him by himself, and it was just James Earl Ray killing Martin Luther King all by himself, and it was just, crazy old Sirhan killing RFK by himself, although when it comes to, the assassination of Malcolm X, that was a conspiracy of several men involved, okay? But when it involves people like the president, the person who was probably going to be president, and the person who opposed against the Vietnam War, MLK, no conspiracy at all. Anyway, so we'll just skim through this real quick, just for a couple of minutes. We'll end this, but there's John Wilkes Booth. There's his photo there. He was an actor, okay? Just like Oswald is an actor. Oswald's playing his part. He's playing his communist, persona. Booth was an actor. I believe he even performed. That's how he was able to get into the theater, because people knew him. He had performed there before, and that's how he was able to get access into the theater, because I think he said he was playing there that night or something like that. But we'll just skim through some of this. Let's see. Hold on one second. This is the Surratt House. This is where all the conspirators stayed the night before. It's in Washington, D.C. The lady who owned the house was actually hung because her son was involved in the conspiracy. But I don't think, there's still debate even today whether she was involved. And let me see here. And although Booth was from Maryland, a lot of people forget that Maryland was a border state. Like there was Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Kentucky, I believe, and then Missouri. These are all border states. They were all slave states, but they didn't succeed from the Union. And inside these states, though, were Confederate sympathizers. There were also Confederate sympathizers called Copperheads in the North. But a lot of these sympathizers went and joined the Confederate fight and, to fight against the Union. And here's one where, so you can see that he's stalking, for the president right here. Here's the inauguration. There's Booth right there. Let's see. And here you go. And this is one of the reasons here. It says John Brown was let's see, was a man inspired the grandest character of the century. On April 11th, Booth attended Lincoln's speech in which Lincoln promoted voting rights for emancipated slaves. Booth said that means, well, you can understand the word there, citizenship, and that is the last speech he will ever give. And that was his motivation, was white supremacy against the blacks. He thought that, Lincoln, that was the main reason. I don't care what people say in the South. They try to say it was about states' rights and bullshit. And you read the declarations of their, succession, and it all has to do with preserving the institution of slavery, because that was the main economic driver of engine for the South, was the plantation slave economy. That was the main reason. Abraham Lincoln ran on a platform of anti-slavery, and they knew that if Lincoln became president, he would probably push for freeing the slaves. And let's see, hold on one second. All right, so this is one of the reasons why Mary Surratt got hung. She was the first woman, I believe, ever hung for conspiracy. So it says, Booth went to Mary Surratt's boarding house in Washington, D.C. and asked her to deliver a package to the tavern in Surrattsville, Maryland. He also asked her to tell Lieutenant Louis Weichman to ready the guns and ammunition that Booth had previously stored at the tavern. The conspirators met for the final time at 8:45. Booth assigned Powell to kill Secretary of State William Seward at his home, at Surratt to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson at the Kirkwood Hotel, and Harold to guide Powell, who was unfamiliar with Washington, to the Seward house, and then to rendezvous both with Booth in Maryland. All right, so it says Booth knew the play Our American Cousin by heart and waited to time his shot at about 10:15 when the laughter at one of the hilarious lines of the play delivered by the actor Harry Hawk, "Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sock-dazzling old man-trap." Let's see, Lincoln was laughing at this line when Booth opened the door, stepped forward, and shot Lincoln from behind with his pistol. The bullet entered Lincoln's skull behind his left ear, passed through his brain, and came to a rest near the front of the skull after fracturing both orbital plates. Now, I find that really interesting because, you can remember, Kennedy was shot from the front, and that passed by his ear there. RFK, the autopsy says that he was shot within 2 inches of his left ear, or maybe the right ear, I believe. Anyway, so it's very interesting that these people were shot all in the head. Let's see. We'll keep going here. And, of course, he jumped from the balcony. I think he injured his leg, and then he screamed in Latin, "Sic tempora tyrannus," thus always the tyrant. So, Booth wasn't some dumb yokel. He was a pretty smart guy. Let's see. All right. It says Lincoln died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15th. Oh, tax day. Wow. So April's not a real great month, actually, for a lot of things. And here's the conspiracy. It says Booth had assigned Lewis Powell to kill Secretary of State William Seward on the night of the assassination. Seward was at home on Lafayette Square, that's right across from the White House, confined to a bed and recovering from injuries sustained on April 5th for being thrown from his carriage. Harold guided Powell to Seward's house. Powell carried a 1958 Whitney revolver and a Bowie knife. William Bell Seward's maitre d' answered the door when Powell knocked at 10:10 p.m. As Powell made his way, wow, that's almost exactly the same time. So he shot Lincoln at 10:15, and he's going to enter and kill Seward around the same time. As Booth made his way to the presidential box, Powell told Bell that they had medicine for Seward's physician, and his instructions were to personally show Seward how to take it. Overcoming Bell's skepticism, Powell made his way up the stairs to Seward's third-floor bedroom. At the top of the staircase, he was stopped by Seward's son, to whom he repeated the medicine story. Frederick, suspicious, said his father was asleep. Hearing voices, Seward's daughter family emerged from Seward's room and said, "Fred, father is awake now," thus revealing to Powell where Seward was. Powell turned as if to start downstairs, but suddenly turned again and drew his revolver. He aimed at Frederick's forehead and pulled the trigger, but the gun misfired, so he bludgeoned Frederick unconscious with his Bell, yelling, "Murder, murder," ran outside for help. Fanny opened the door again, and Powell shoved past her to Seward's bed. He stabbed at Seward's face and neck, slicing open his cheek. However, the splint, often mistakenly described as a neck brace the doctors had fitted to Seward's broken jaw, prevented the blade from penetrating the jugular vein. Seward eventually recovered, though the serious scars on his face. Seward's son Augustus and Sergeant George Robinson, a soldier assigned to Seward, were alerted by Fanny's screams and received stab wounds and struggling with Powell. As Augustus went for a pistol, Powell ran down the stairs toward the door, where he encountered Emerald Hansel, a State Department messenger. Powell stabbed him in the back and then ran outside, exclaiming, "I'm mad, I'm mad." Screams from the house had frightened Harold, who ran off, leaving Powell to find his own way in the unfamiliar city. Wow. That's crazy. So there's Andrew Johnson, who's the vice president. But, wait a minute. Okay. So it says Booth had assigned George Etzerat to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, who was staying at the Kirkwood House in Washington. I'm not sure where that's at. Etzerat was going to Johnson's room at 10:15 exactly, wow, and shoot him. On April 14th, Etzerat ran to the room directly above Johnson's. The next day, he arrived there at a appointed time and carrying a gun and a knife. Went to a bar downstairs where he asked the bartender about Johnson's character and behavior. He eventually became drunk and wandered off to the streets, tossing his knife away. At some point, he made his way to the Pennsylvania House Hotel at 2 a.m., where he obtained a room and went to sleep. Early in the day, Booth had stopped by Kirkwood House and left a note for Johnson. "I don't wish to disturb you. Are you home? Are you at home?" One theory holds that Booth was trying to find out whether Johnson was expected at the Kirkwood that night. Another holds that Booth concerned that Altsrud would fail to kill Johnson, intending the note to implicate Johnson in the conspiracy. Wow. All right. Wow, here's another one I didn't know. So Lincoln was killed on the Saturday after Good Friday, and then Easter came. Wow. That's an interesting, sort of like Jesus, I guess you could say. Let's see. Now this shows the escape. It's got Booth fleeing the Ford's Theater, going to the Surratt Tavern, picking up weapons at midnight. He went to Dr. Mudd because, remember, Dr. Mudd was an associate of theirs, or not associate, but someone knew of Dr. Mudd, and they knew they could go there and he could take care of him. Dr. Mudd wasn't aware that Booth had killed Lincoln, and so he remember, Booth jumped off the balcony, messed up his leg, and Dr. Mudd set his leg and helped him with that. For that act of kindness, because he's following his Hippocratic oath, Dr. Mudd was sent to prison down in Florida. It's a prison fort right past Key West, I believe west of Key West. I think it's Tortugas or something. And he didn't do anything wrong. He was just helping someone. He didn't know the person just happened to be the assassin of the president. Let's see, what else? They went to the home of Samuel Scott. They stayed in the woods. They went to the Lucas farm and the Garrett's farm. Now, it's my understanding that they showed up at the Garrett's farm, and even though they were Southern sympathizers, they had heard about what Booth had done and wanted no part of it. But I believe he was holding like one of the children hostage or something like that, and then they end up sleeping in the barn. And I believe that one of the Garretts notified the military that Booth was there. I believe that's how the story goes, if I remember it correctly. Wow, $50,000 reward back in 1865. $100,000 reward. Wow, that's a lot of money. That's a couple $1 million nowadays. Oh, 900,000, so that would have been over $1.8 million, almost $2 million. Let's see. Both Booth and Harold was sleeping at the Garrett's farm on April 26 when soldiers from the 16th New York Cavalry arrived and surrounded the barn, then threatening to set fire to it. Harold surrendered. Booth cried out, "I will not be taken alive." Wow, it's almost like Oswald in the theater. This is it, and he pulls his gun. Anyway, the soldiers set fire to the barn, and Booth scrambled for the back door with rifle and pistol. Sergeant Boston Corbett crept up behind the barn and shot Booth in the back of the head, about an inch below the spot where Booth's shot had entered Lincoln's head. Severing the spinal cord, Booth was carried out onto the steps of the barn. A soldier poured water in his mouth, which he spat out, unable to swallow. Booth told the soldier, "Tell my mother I die for my country." Unable to move his limbs, he asked the soldier to lift his hand before his face and whispered his last words as he gazed at them. Unless he died on the porch of the Garrett farm 2 hours later. Corbett was initially arrested for disobeying orders from Stanton, that Booth be taken alive, if possible. Booth was later released and was largely considered a hero by the media. Let's see. Without Harold to guide him, Powell did not find his way back to the Surratt house until April 17th. He told detectives waiting there that he was a ditch digger hired by Mary Surratt, but she denied knowing him. Both were arrested. George Etzrod hid in his cousin's farm in Germantown, Maryland, about 25 miles northwest of Washington, where he was arrested on April 20th. The remaining conspirators were arrested by month's end, except for John Surratt, who fled to Quebec, where Roman Catholic priests hid him. In September, he boarded a ship to Liverpool, England, staying in a Catholic church of the Holy Cross there. From there, he moved furtively through Europe until he joined the Pontifical Zouaves in the Papal States. So he joined the Papal Guard. Wow, interesting. A friend from in school days recognized him early in 1866 and alerted the U.S. government. Surratt was arrested by the papal authorities, but managed to escape under suspicious circumstances. He was finally captured by an agent of the United States in Egypt in, November 1867. So you see, conspiracies can and do exist. So it says here the conspirators. Anyway, we'll go over the conspirator trial tomorrow, and but don't let anyone tell you that if you believe in conspiracies, you believe that, and all you're doing when you say you believe in a conspiracy in the JFK assassination is you believe that Oswald was not the only person involved in the assassination. Okay, that's all it means. Two or more people involved in a crime. Anyway, take care, and we'll pick this up tomorrow.